This is the route I took when I swam the English Channel, and whenever I show people, there is one question that comes up again and again. Why didn't you swim in a straight line? Which is a perfectly reasonable question. France is over there, and I started up here. And according to this, I spent 15 hours going in the wrong direction repeatedly. I promise I wasn't lost. But when you swim the English Channel, or any other channel for that matter, you are not just swimming across a body of water. You have tides, you have shipping lanes, so many things to contend with. And the tides are moving you sideways, which for most of the time is fine until you get to the end. In my case, I was really trying to land at Cap Gris-Nez, which is the big headland sticking out here-ish. And if I didn't get there before the tide swept me off sideways, I'd have had another few hours of swimming to do. And that's why after about 14 hours of swimming, my crew said, now's the time to push. Now's the time to push. Which isn't exactly what you want to hear when you've been swimming since 3 o'clock in the morning and it's almost 5. So why do channel swimmers take on these ridiculous routes? And knowing all of this, why am I then taking on the Bristol Channel, which has some of the largest tidal ranges in the world? I think we need to talk about tides. Now, if you were planning an English Channel swim with absolutely no knowledge of the sea, you would probably start off here, point yourself at France, and just swim straight. And that is basically what you're doing. You're not deliberately swimming in this shape. As a swimmer, though, you're generally quite unaware because you've got a pilot who's steering a boat, and as far as you can tell, you're just looking to the side to be navigated by them. The problem is the water is doing something slightly different. Imagine you're trying to walk across one of the airport travelators, except the travelator is changing directions every few hours. The English Channel isn't a swimming pool, it has tides that ebb and flow. So while as far as I'm concerned I am swimming straight, the water's got something else in mind. If you just had a bird's eye view on me for the swim, you'd think I was swimming fairly straight. But it's just then when you look at the GPS track that it starts doing something a bit wild. It's often exactly what the pilot expects to happen, and they ask about things like your pacing well in advance so they can make sure that you are positioned perfectly so that when it comes to it, you're in the optimum position following the tide to be able to land exactly where you need to. The next question I usually get is, why don't you fight it? So if the tide's pushing you that way, why don't you automatically start just swimming that way? And that's probably because you're then spending a huge amount of effort fighting an enormous body of water, and the water is going to win. You are just one person. The English Channel is still the English Channel. You are not going to be able to teach it a lesson. Most channel pilots have been doing this for decades. They know roughly how the water is going to move throughout the crossing, and they're constantly looking at where the boat is, how quickly you're swimming, and what the tide is doing. And the exact route isn't going to be the same for every swimmer either. For people who really want to get into it, there is a bit more terminology here, which is the idea of spring and neap tides. And no, spring tides have nothing to do with spring, which does feel unnecessarily confusing. So the moon and the sun both exert like a gravitational pull on the Earth's oceans. So when the sun, the moon and the earth are all roughly aligned, which usually happens around a new moon or a full moon, those effects can combine, which makes a spring tide. So this means your high tides are even higher, your low tides are even lower, and the tidal range is much bigger. Then around the first and third quarter moons, the sun and moon are pulling from different directions. So their effects partly counteract each other, creating a neap tide. This means that the differences between the high tide and the low tide are much smaller. Don't worry, that's probably about as much astronomy as we're doing right now. The important bit for us is about how the tidal cycle affects the strength and timing of the currents that a swimmer is going to encounter. What this actually feels like to the swimmer. For most of my English Channel swim, I wasn't aware of this. I wasn't swimming along thinking, oh excellent, I can feel the tidal stream changing. I was swimming, I was feeding. The tide can keep moving you significantly without you feeling as though you're being dramatically swept sideways. And for most of the English Channel, again, that change is okay. And ideally, everything works together and you land beautifully on the French coast. Except France is not one enormous finishing line. And this is where tides can go from, oh, just a pretty squiggle on a map to actually something really important. So this is Cap Gris-Nez. It is a massive headland sticking out of the French coast, and it's a really common landing spot for an English Channel swim. I also landed on it very close to the edge. And that's because towards the end of my swim, it was a bit of a race to get there. The tide was pulling me sideways past Cap Gris-Nez, so I had to sprint finish to make sure I actually landed on the rocks. Otherwise, it could have added hours onto my swim to land at Wisant Beach. For context, this is Wisant Beach. And bearing in mind at this point, I had been swimming for 14 hours. I was really tired. I could see France. I could see the cliffs. For a long time, I was swimming staring at France and moving sideways, so I didn't necessarily feel like I was getting any closer. I could see trees, I could see details on the rocks, but I wasn't necessarily getting nearer. At one point, my crew was screaming at me to keep on going, and because I couldn't hear them because I had earplugs in, I stopped, pulled an earplug out and went, "What?" And they were like, "Ah!" and screaming at me to just keep on going. And at this point too, I wasn't swimming right. Like, I had a graze underneath my right arm where I think we'd missed some like Sudocrem and Vaseline, and so I'd essentially grazed my skin to like a carpet burn under my arm. So it was really painful when I tried to do a stroke. And on my left hand side, my shoulder didn't feel right at all. So both of my arms were not great for swimming, but I was still pushing with everything I had to really get to the end and use the tide to help me in a way. And as I was doing the swim, one thing I kept looking for was the dinghy to come out. So I swam with the boat Viking Princess 2, which is a catamaran. So it's actually quite stable for my crew. But because of the size of a lot of the pilot boats, they can't get too close to the coast because of the rocks and because it's quite shallow. So every time I turned to breathe to my right, I was looking out for the grey dinghy that would be escorting me to the coast. And once that came out, I knew we were close to the end and that I was getting to France within the next sort of 20 minutes or so, which is an excellent feeling, although really difficult when you're like, oh, I still have to keep on going. And for the amount of time I was looking for that and I didn't see it, it was really difficult. So in the end, I did hit Cap Gris-Nez in 15 hours and 13 minutes. As an aside, I think that was a really important part of my training to make sure that when I was doing longer swims, I had something at the end that meant I could just push if needed. So is it better to be squigglier or not so squiggly? Usually, when you see a route that is particularly straight, that can be part of the tides and dependent upon when they went out. A really notable English Channel swim I want to share with you is one that keeps going viral, and it's that of Sophie Etheridge, who swam the English Channel in August 2023. It took her almost 30 hours, so she did it in 29 hours and 4 minutes. And it's quite squiggly, as you can see, and each one of those squiggles represents where the tide has turned, which happens about every 6 hours. And it's amazing that she was able to do this and keep on going for so long. And that's probably one of the biggest things I want you to take away from the video. A squigglier route isn't a worse route in any way, but you can't look at it in the same way you might look at other swims or other sports necessarily. Because every time the tide turns, that represents an even longer stretch of being in that water and pushing with your swim. People talk about the English Channel being 21 miles at its shortest point, or 33.3 kilometers, but that really doesn't mean that every channel swimmer swims 21 miles. Your actual route can be so much longer because you're doing this and not this. And this brings me on to a slight problem: the Bristol Channel. Because in about 3 weeks' time, I'll be swimming the Bristol Channel. The Bristol Channel has the second largest tidal range in the world. In parts of the Severn Estuary, the difference in water level between high and low tide can be enormous. And all of that has to keep moving in and back out again. So my swim is from Glenthorne to Porthcawl. So Glenthorne marks the sort of boundary of the Devon and Somerset county borders, and at Porthcawl I have to be landing west of the Ogmore River to make it my swim count for the original Triple Crown. And again, this is not going to be a swim that is a lovely straight line. The tide is going to be a really fundamental part of how this swim works. In the middle of a sea swim, being carried sideways is par for the course. So the next time you see an English Channel swimmer and you wonder if they even wanted to get across at all because of their route, now you know. They probably weren't lost, and your crew might just scream at you until you do. And that did happen for me in 15 hours and 13 minutes at Cap Gris-Nez. And apparently, having learned nothing from the experience, I still have the Bristol Channel to go. A stretch of water with some of the largest tides in the world. They say ignorance is bliss, and I don't really have that now. Wish me luck.